Well, good pleasure to be in Pierce, South Dakota, the state capital, talking to the new governor of the great state of South Dakota, Larry Rhoden. Governor, congratulations.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Yeah, glad to have you here, and good to see you. And it's been fun knowing you over the years and your political journey from the ranch in the West River. We got a West River governor in North Dakota now too, so it's fun to see what's happening in South Dakota, and we're looking forward to learning a little bit about what you have planned here. So how's it feel so far?
Oh, it's been great. You know, there was one thing about this transition. Our cabinet, the staff. You know, I was here with Governor Noem when I think almost all of them were hired, and so I was in on interviews and been working with them for 6 years. So it was a pretty seamless transition that way. I already knew the staff, and we have a good bunch of people working for us, and same with the cabinet. So I was pretty fortunate to just inherit the workforce that I have.
We have listeners in South Dakota, North Dakota, Western Minnesota, Montana, and not all of them might be familiar with you. So just first of all, tell us a little bit about your journey to here.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in western South Dakota, a little ranch about 40 miles east of Sturgis. Ranch my dad put together when he came back from World War II. I have a brother that lives on about 2 miles away on the original homestead that my grandfather approved up on in 1907. And so our roots run really deep in western South Dakota. So I was born and raised on that ranch, and I took it over when my wife and I were married 44 years ago. Just short of 44 years. We have 4 kids, 4 boys, 7 grandkids, and they're all within an hour's drive of my ranch house in western South Dakota. And so grew up on that ranch and always pretty active in the community, and then on local boards, got on the school board. I say I ran for the legislature so I'd have an excuse to get off the school board. And then decided as long as I'm in the legislature, I wanted to have a seat at the table, so I ran for leadership positions and worked my way up the chain of leadership. Served a total of 16 years, and before Governor Noem asked me to be her running mate.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Rest is history.
What do you like better, hanging out in the shop at home on the ranch, or herding cats in the legislature as governor?
You know, it has been really a great mix. My years in the legislature, especially as lieutenant governor, sold the cows about 4 years ago when this job became full-time. When I was, for a period of time, I was Secretary of Ag, and then the governor invented the position of Ag Ambassador when we combined the Ag Department and Environment and Natural Resources. So it was a great mix for me to be down here and working, traveling the state, doing what I love, visiting with farmers and ranchers, and doing trade missions and working with the ag industry pretty closely, and then I'd have time at home. And what I once did as supplemental income as far as my ranch shop, I do a lot of custom welding, and what used to be a lucrative sideline turned into therapy for me. So I could.
And we have a product of your work right here.
Yep.
Brand, and you're still doing that, huh?
Yep, I've built tens of thousands of branding irons in my last 40, 50 years.
That's pretty cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about South Dakota and the big picture right now. You mentioned agriculture. Obviously, commodity prices are a little bit challenging right now, and that's put a little pinch on the state budget. How do you maneuver that?
Well, you know, it's an interesting position we're in, because we've had several years, our economy has just been going gangbusters. After COVID, we came out of COVID with the strongest economy in the nation. And now with the downturn in commodity prices and whatnot, we've had a downturn, pretty significant downturn in our budget this year. And so we've had to make some tough decisions. As always, we have Governor Noem presented a balanced budget, and when I took the reins, I announced my speech. I wasn't going to change the budget. Hopefully we'll find, if the revenue numbers improve, we'll be able to restore some of the cuts that we've made. But like I tell the legislature, it's a zero-sum game. Unless the revenue numbers improve, for every dollar we spend, we're going to have to increase our revenues someplace else.
Obviously, with a tighter budget, you do like everybody does at every kitchen table in South Dakota, just sit down and figure it out and say what's coming in, what's going out. One of the things you want to do is some property tax reform. We're wrestling with that now in North Dakota as well. How do you maneuver a tighter budget, but also giving some property tax relief?
Well, it's a great question. In fact, I just had a meeting just in this last hour with members of the House and the Senate and members of my team, and we sat around the table and had that very discussion. Because especially when you're in a tight budget year, in order to move the needle on property taxes, you're not talking tens of millions, or you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to really move the needle. And so we were looking at common sense practices, the things that we could do on the exemptions, and what I call a rifle shot approach rather than a shotgun approach, to really provide help and assistance to the citizens that are really getting kicked in the teeth with these assessments on owner-occupied properties. Very encouraged by the feedback I got from that group and the input that they gave, different ideas that we could help. We set a model in front of them, and we're working now to massage that and address specific areas where we think we can help move the needle without a source of additional revenue to do it.
I saw your speech and enjoyed it as governor for the legislature, and you talked about eminent domain being a hot issue this session, and talked about your work in the legislature over the years, way back 20-some years ago, prime sponsor on legislation that dealt with it back then. And you talked about extremist environmental policies from Washington not being good for South Dakota or for our nation. If you had your say, what would come out of this session related to eminent domain?
Well, on eminent domain, the legislation you talked about was the product of, you remember, Kelo versus New London, when the Supreme Court ruled that economic development was sufficient reason to use eminent domain. We were the first state in the nation, and again, that was, I was majority leader at the time, and there were a lot of people talking about solutions, and so I brought the parties together, and we were the first state in the nation that actually passed legislation that said not in South Dakota. That's not good enough, and we made it clear in state law, because the Supreme Court decision allowed for that, said if states want to have a higher standard than their ruling, that was fine. And so that's what we did, and that became model legislation. But as far as where we're at right now, I will always have been and always will be a defender of property rights. But I also think that we shouldn't change the rules in the middle of a game. And we need to be a state that is open for opportunity. So with all that said, I'm waiting to see what comes to the desk. There's a number of pieces of legislation, and we've been monitoring them and having conversations to see how that's going.
It seems to me, when you talk about changing the rules in the middle of the game, that there is some concern over a green agenda sort of infiltrating South Dakota. I'm curious what you think about that. I look at it from a little different perspective. One of the reasons that I think there's a unique opportunity right now with CO2 coming off ethanol plants in South Dakota, and ultimately helping the neighbors to the north enhance oil recovery, or let coal plants live to fight another day. I'm more interested in the price of corn going up than I am succumbing to any green agenda. But what's your take on this debate?
Well, yeah, that's why it's so difficult when you're trying to do this balancing act between your economy and opportunity and property rights. It's tough to wrap your arms around that, and it's very easily misperceived what your agenda is. But you've touched on a lot of it, and when I look at the potential to benefit our producers. And still try to balance the property rights and the use of eminent domain. I think that there's somewhere in the mix, there's a balance, and that's what we're going to try and strive for this legislative session.
It seems some people in the House in South Dakota believe they owe their seat, if you will, to opposition, no matter what, And are you confident you can find some compromise with them?
I am. I think there's, I think the people that are here are reasonable people, and I think we can reason with them, and we can talk through this, and I think I've put myself in the position to be the person that can bring consensus to some of those tough issues like this.
You talked about not changing the rules in the middle of the game. What specifically do you mean by that?
Well, there are a number of times, we had, basically by unwritten policy, when I was in the legislature, we didn't introduce legislation where there were pending legal cases, because it really blurs the line, the separation of powers, and in one regard, that'd be changing the rules in the middle of something that's being litigated. And right now, even with pipelines, an all-out ban on pipelines, is that changing the rules? Because there's already been taking steps taken to move forward on this, and I don't know just whether that applies to the same kind of logic or not.
You talked about South Dakota being open for business. And South Dakota has a great reputation. We saw it during COVID, obviously, when the rest of the country was shutting down. I think back to, I think it was the Janklow years or maybe before, when you did reform related to, attracting banks here and really bringing in business. I actually am going to date myself, but I did an interview one time with both Bill Janklow and Rudy Perpich. And at the time, Minnesota was losing businesses to South Dakota. This would have been in the 80s. And Janklow was loving every minute of it. But you guys have a great reputation for that. I assume when you talk about being open for business, you're talking about, A, we don't want to change the rules in the game. Anybody looking to invest here, yes, but also what kind of opportunity could come from some kind of a solution in this regard. I think of the sustainable aviation fuel plant that's been proposed. I think that's by Madison, right? North of $1 billion. There's data centers coming in. I saw McPherson County put a moratorium on data centers. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about, where there's great opportunity and we need to be careful here?
Well, that's certainly one consideration. You're talking about GEVO in eastern South Dakota.
Yeah, so that's what you mean by being open for business.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, makes sense. DOGE is a big deal on the national level, the Department of Government Efficiency. And I see you're thinking about, hey, maybe we've been there, done that, but we're still looking. If we can be more efficient here, great. And if we can help Elon Musk and President Trump out, we're willing to do that too, huh?
Oh yeah, and I that's one thing we've been having discussions about. And one thing I said in a press conference the other day, I think we've got an opportunity with President Trump. Obviously, we haven't had since he was president before. And Kristi Noem mentioned, I don't know how many times, our first 2 years in our administration, we had Trump, and every day we were on the offensive. We were getting things done, and we were being proactive. The last 4 years we've been on defense and just trying to hold back the tide of some of the federal regulations that were coming down the pipe at us. Well, now the tides have turned, and with DOGE and with some of the like the Chevron decision, there are opportunities for the state to work with the federal government and the Trump administration to find efficiencies and to help shrink the size of our federal government and release the states from some of the overburdensome regulations.
What do you, anything on the low-hanging fruit list you're thinking of that would be a good recommendation for them?
No, we're just on the front end of, I've put all of our agencies, had meetings with all of our cabinet secretaries and just gave notice to them to start looking. And we're sifting through the executive orders and finding appropriate ways to make presentations to our federal government on ideas for cutting regulations and red tape.
It feels like morning in America again right now, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Yeah, and obviously you're the freest state in the union. You guys boast that, and you got a lot to back that up.
I've said it 100 times if I've said it once, and I believe it every time I say it. I say it without reservation that we're the freest state.
Yeah, and probably the only things that hold you back come from Washington and the federal government, so it's refreshing to see the change now, isn't it?
That's right.
What area do you think will make the most difference for South Dakota once this all settles out from the Trump administration?
With the Trump administration,
farmers, ranchers having a little less of a thumb on their operations, or?
You know, for agriculture, of course, agriculture's king in South Dakota. It's outpaces our number 2 industry by like 7-fold. And I think there's always, I got more involved just in recent years on foreign trade in South Dakota. We've lagged behind on that. And I think when the dust settles, when Trump hits his stride, that we'll have a lot better opportunity to promote our ag industry and to market our ag products out of South Dakota. So I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities for us.
There's a debate right now about tariffs, and the president had announced that at midnight tonight, Mexico and Canada both would get a 25% increase in tariffs. They already blinked and said, hey, wait a minute here, we'll do more. And so there's a 30-day pause on that. But there's a debate. I talk to farmers and ranchers every day. I talked to a fellow today who was building a house, said my lumber prices are going to go up. Obviously, the commodity groups get concerned. What are your thoughts on using tariff to sort of, in this case, enhance the border security and the flow of fentanyl into the country, but more so just as tariffs as a tool to get others to wake up a little bit when it comes to how they're dealing with the United States?
Well, as an Aggie and involved with a number of these ag groups, I understand their concerns. But I also have a feeling of deja vu from 4 years ago, 6 years ago, when we were going through some of the same, hand-wringing about what Trump was doing. And remember how that played out? It went well for the ag industry. And so I'm willing to give a little grace to President Trump and a little faith that I think he knows what he's doing.
Let me ask you a last question about agriculture related to South Dakota's role and the future in the world economy. Obviously, we started with a little bit of a debate over the tightening budget situation because of the current commodity prices and where things are at. Just dream a little bit. What more could happen in South Dakota's role in exporting its great products to the world?
Well, for starters, out west, mostly cattle country, the cattle market's been great. And we've seen some recovery in the corn prices. I talked to an old friend of mine that was commissioner of economic development, and we were talking about selling our corn, exporting corn. He said we should not export a bushel of corn out of the state. And I said, what do you mean? He says we shouldn't export anything until we've added value to it. We shouldn't export corn. We should export ethanol and export dry distiller's grain, or same with the beef industry. So, for me, a vision for South Dakota is to do exactly that, and we've become a powerhouse for, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of gallons of ethanol we produce every year, and biofuels, and so value-added agriculture, I think, and trade are the two levers to success for the future of South Dakota.
What's the next level on that? Is it sustainable aviation fuel as an example?
I think that's one of the components in that.
And certainly, there's a good example, I think, where we're sort of fighting the battle of the quote-unquote green agenda. Yet there's this huge market that if we want to play the game, we have to find some solution to make the carbon score look a little better for them, regardless of whether we think it's a good idea or not, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Coming from out west, I kind of had an attitude, once upon a time about ethanol, but it's really a no-brainer for South Dakota for us to, North Dakota has all the oil, and we're never going to be a major energy producer as far as petroleum, but we raise a lot of corn, and after I was more educated about the ethanol industry and the value of ethanol, the fact that we're the byproduct of a bushel of corn after it's produced 3 gallons of ethanol is the feed value is more than 100% of what it was prior to being processed. Those kind of things that I don't think even the average South Dakotan understands. And so the potential just in ethanol and some of our ag commodities is tremendous.
Yeah, in fact, I can share a similar story from North Dakota's oil folks who were not a fan of ethanol at all, but ironically how things turn around is right now North Dakota's oil fields are set to go into terminal decline in the next decade. They're tired, and what will revive them and bring revenue flowing back in is enhanced oil recovery, and that only happens with CO2, which comes off of ethanol plants. So now we have a whole new alliance. So the future's bright for both in the ag and energy world. Yeah, so, yeah. Last question for you on education. School choice is a debate always on how to do it better, a little different. I saw that Kristen Ulm on her way out sort of said this is important to her. Give me your vision on what school choice would look like.
Well, we had an ESA, Education Savings Accounts bill, that was very limited. Total cost like $4 million for school choice. It wasn't vouchers. It was reimbursements for verifiable expenses, and it's kind of stalled out in the House right now, and they're considering, I think they've drafted a bill, a similar bill that they're considering introducing in the Senate as we speak.
I saw you said there's a way to do this without impacting homeschool parents or public schools.
Right, yep.
Yeah. So you think you confident something will happen?
Well, you know, the education lobby has come out with a pretty fierce opposition to it.
Nothing new there, right?
Right. But that combined with having a very large crop of freshman legislators, that's always difficult. And coming from the legislature and being in leadership, it was kind of funny to watch sometimes with freshman legislators. They could get a half dozen emails and just plumb tip them over on an issue. And I think we see a lot of that right now. And so that's difficult to manage.
You sent a letter to President Trump today about fireworks in South Dakota. Tell us what you want.
Well, we just like, what was it, 4 years ago when Trump was out here last? 5 years ago, when Trump was out here the last time and that was the last.
It was July 4th, 2020. Yeah, that was epic. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna try and repeat that and bring him out to South Dakota for the 250-year celebration, and so I'm optimistic that we'll get him out here again.
I forwarded a copy of your letter to the new Secretary of Interior, a fellow by the name of Doug Burgum,
yeah,
who was our former governor.
I need to reach out to him too, because we'll work together on that.
Yeah, so I said, you know, hey, here's a letter you probably haven't seen yet, but it's for your boss, but you could make it happen pretty quick. And he said, actually, you know, North Dakota is working on the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library opening the same weekend, and he said to tell you that it looks like there's going to be 4 days of celebration around the 4th of July, and he said, I'm sure we'll get Trump back to both South Dakota and North Dakota.
Perfect.
So some progress anyway.
Yep.
Doing anything we can. So look forward to that happening. Shouldn't fireworks be every year at Mt Rushmore?
Well, the 4 years since we had Biden, and we tried to have fireworks, and they weren't allowed. You know, it's a national park, and so we weren't able to get past President Biden on having the fireworks display again in the last 4 years.
Confuses me a little bit, because I'm thinking you know a little bit better about protecting South Dakota from anything that might happen related to his concerns than maybe the federal government does. What do you think?
I believe so.
So good luck on that one.
Thank you.
Wish you well. We'll keep in touch during the session and help pushing on any of your priorities or anything else we can do, and love covering the legislature for our South Dakota listeners, and great to catch up with you. Thanks so much for the time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.